some people take the position that the BLA came out of the Black Panther Party. There are other people who take the position that the concept of the BLA was long before the Black Panther Party. I think that the BLA has some of its manifestations, not all of them, in Deacons for Defense. They came out of Bogalusa, Louisiana. Some of it can be found in Robert Williams, Monroe, North Carolina, where black people, took up arms to defend themselves. Some go back to Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, the slave rebellions, We like to think that there was a Black Liberation Army from the time that black people stepped foot on the shores of North America. But to answer the question in more contemporary times, I would take the position that the BLA arose out of the Black Panther Party. And that rise came about due to the counterintelligence program that was waged against the Black Panther Party and other segments of the Black Liberation Movement. The BLA was an organization. I take the position that the BLA came about, the Black Panther Party gave birth to the contemporary Black Liberation Army. This was a very difficult birth, meaning that the BLA was born in blood. It was premature, but the conditions of the time and the split within the Black Panther Party made us have to move the way we started moving. But if we had had more time, I think that we could have did a much better job in terms of developing the Black Liberation Army. Well, it was two major factors. It all stemmed from the counterintelligence program. Once J. Edgar Hoover started waging war against the party, a lot of things started happening. A lot of Panthers started getting framed up on trumped-up charges, sentenced to long prison sentences. There was a lot of conspiracy cases going on during that time. Panther 21 case, which involved Sunday Outer and a number of other Panthers. There were killings taking place through the government, Fred Hampton. Counterintelligence program of US organization, pitting us and the Panthers against each other, alleged to the death of Bunchy Carter and John Huggins at UCLA. Even the shootout with Bobby Hutton and whatnot, manifestation can be found within the counterintelligence program. So those were some of the conditions that forced people to have to go underground. And then there was a split within the Black Panther Party, which we now take the position that much of that was orchestrated by the counterintelligence program. It was exploited, and it started pitting Panthers against each other. And people didn't feel safe, A lot of people, this split caused a number of Panthers and chapters around the country to be expelled. I just want to clarify some things in regards to the split. There are those who take the position that it was the East-West Coast split, but the split was much deeper than the East-West Coast thing. We need to be real clear on that. New York Panther 21 was on trial. They were expelled from the Black Panther Party. Now that's prior to the New York chapter being expelled. They expelled, the Panther 21 was expelled, and then later the chapter was expelled. But not only did, and that's New York being on the East Coast, but also the LA chapter was expelled. It's a West Coast thing. Geronimo Pratt was expelled from the Black Panther Party. So you had leadership here on the East Coast of the Black Panther Party on the East Coast being expelled from the party, while the Panther chapter was left intact for a short period of time before they were expelled. You had people on the East Coast decided to go with Huey. For example, the Baltimore chapter, they went with the West Coast. So it was not, the split was much deeper than the East-West Coast thing. It had a lot to do with the leadership of the party at that time. It had a lot to do with police repression that brought this about. The split in part was brought about due to the counterintelligence program. And due to the pressures that the counterintelligence program was placing upon the party, there were those in leadership, and some of their thinking was that they wanted to de-radicalize the Black Panther Party. They took on reformist, things that they were doing in terms of organizing the masses of people. They're those that say that the Black Panther Party existed for 16 years, from 66 to 82 or 83. And then there are those who say that the party existed as a revolutionary organization from 1966 to 1971. And in 71, well, that was when the New York chapter was expelled and whatnot. We on the East Coast, I won't say East Coast, we were here in New York. We had a very short run in the Black Panther Party. The party came to New York in the spring of 1968, and by the summer of 71, it was over with for us. We had a 3-year run in the Black Panther Party, but it was a very intense 3 years, very, very intense. I mean, we crowded, I would say, 30 years into those 3 years. And those 3 years, due to government repression, left an indelible mark among members of the Black Panther Party. A lot of people were still who were in their 60s, late 50s, who are still affected from that period of time. It had a profound effect upon a lot of people, A lot of people are still damaged from that period of time. But you have people with psychosis, you have people who have mental disorders, you have people who took to drinking and drugs, alcohol, post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from that period of time and whatnot, nervous breakdowns, a whole assortment of ailments that came out of that period of time because, you had young people. The average Panther was between the ages of 17, 22. That was the average age of a Panther, 23 maybe. But when you got to be 25, 30, you were considered old. Elders, we refer to elders proper age. Elders was in his 30s, so that was considered old. So you had a lot of youth that came into the party, and they gave it their all. It was very committed, and very, very committed young people who came into the party. We lived in a time in the 1960s when it was a very tumultuous decade, It was an exciting time, and we were in a position to bring about some major changes in this country. It was at a point in time when we really could have came very close to changing this government permanently, and I've never, in my study of history, I haven't known any other time where we came that close to bringing about a revolution in the United States, which would have affected our lives. We would have been in a much better place today. I would think that in the beginning that Bobby and Huey, having an understanding of Marxism, Leninism, and Maoist thought, and the overall black movement at the time, a lot of elements of the black movement knew that we would be in for a protracted struggle, and that we knew that we would have to have a military apparatus to even defend any type of organization for security and other aspects that an organization of that type would need. In the early days of the Black Panther Party, it was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. So arms was a very key factor in the development of the Black Panther Party. In terms of its military wing, Bunchy Carter, Deputy Minister of Defense for the Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party, LA. He came into the Black Panther Party after prison, after having met Eldridge in Folsom. I think they were in Folsom. Bunchy was a brother off the street. In political terms, we refer to as the lumpen element. Bunchy was the leader of a very strong and large gang in LA called the Slauson Street. Bunchy virtually, coming into the Black Panther Party, brought a whole military wing into the Black Panther Party. The LA chapter, they recognized from the very onstart that it would be a need for an element of people, underground element to protect the party. they created a thing called the Wolves, and they functioned. A lot of those brothers never became known as Panther members. A lot of them did recruitment and other things for the Black Panther Party. You had a lot of people come into the Black Panther Party that was Vietnam vets. With Geronimo Pratt, they had military expertise, and they put that to work for the Black Panther Party. I mean, it saved a lot of lives, and it prevented more provocations and shootouts than probably would have taken place. The party being an organization that had an open door policy which allowed for all kinds of people to join the party. You know, it was a party where anybody could join the Black Panther Party. And even though it had a security apparatus and tried to screen out people, that open door policy allowed for a lot of informants and agent provocateurs to come into the party and create havoc and disruption. You know, I would say that there were Panthers, especially in the LA chapter, who never became known to the public as Panther members, who did things for the party, a military fashion for the party, and protected the party. And I would suppose that existed in other chapters around the country. There was always security apparatus, but the formation of the Black Liberation Army really took off when the counterintelligence program from 68 and 69 on, when the heat of all that was coming out and Panthers were being murdered around the country, that's when the BLA was having its formative years, you know, in contemporary times. Because we talked earlier about the BLA having a concept going back years and years and years before that. And the BLA, you know, why it got its birth from the Black Panther Party. Many people came in, some people, a lot of people who were never Panthers became drafted by the Black Liberation Army. The BLA, one of the things that I was proud of the BLA was that it was never ever infiltrated. That's not to say that people didn't get captured and give up information, but it was never infiltrated because you didn't join the BLA or pick the BLA picked you. You know, many people was chosen and called, and people had a right to heed that call or not. But it wasn't so where you could go and join the BLA. You know, those people were handpicked, and cadres and cells picked their people, and were able to function that way. You know, autonomously from other cells. All cells wasn't autonomous, but there were a lot of cells who were autonomous from each other. And that kept down informants, and I mean, people informing on certain things within BLA because you could only deal with your cell at your particular time. Then the BLA had a policy of, the cells that I functioned with, we had a policy of that 24-hour period. You know, the Algerians, we took that concept from them. Give us 24 hours and we could move. And in most cases, it was much less than 24 hours because we knew that once people was captured, what they was going to be up against, you know. So, I mean, and our whereabouts with our comrades was known all the time. We knew where people was at, and if you could not be accounted for, that was an alert for us, you know, that something was wrong. And so, you know, we pretty much function, you know, safely that way. One of the goals were to try and alleviate some of the oppression, the naked violence that was taking place against the above ground movement, the Black Liberation Movement as a whole around this country. There were a lot of killings within the Black community, especially here in New York City. Cops was throwing young kids off rooftops. And out of all these police murders, they were always justifiable homicide. We could not no longer stand by and have that continue to exist, you know. Our position that since the Black community was very defenseless at that time, that we would take some of that pressure off the Black community and we would absorb some of that. And at the very same time, you know, let them know that there was going to be some forces that they would have to deal with if they continued dealing with the black community in the manner in which they were doing, and the Black Liberation Movement. The BLA, not just the black community as we know it, but also our prisoners and whatnot. BLA took a very strong position around those brothers being murdered at Attica. And if my memory serves me correctly, there was some actions taken in behalf of those Attica brothers. The same thing with George Jackson when he was murdered in San Quentin. We wanted all the forces that be in this country to know that there was going to be some consequences if you kept moving in the manner in which you were moving. And as our youth would have us to be rather audacious at the time, we took the position that if there were going to be wailing in the black household, there would be some wailing in the white household or the oppressor's household, you know, and there had to be funerals on both sides, that you know, we could no longer continue to exist in the manner in which we was existing at that time. The people that I worked with that came out of prisons, they were highly politicized when they came out. They had studied inside of prison. They were in formations in prisons who sent them to us, thought they would make good soldiers. And it wasn't about taking a raw recruit and having to sit him down and politicize him. But I must say this, there were uneven development in BLA with its political education. Some brothers and sisters were more politicized than other brothers and sisters. And sometimes your politicalization affects the position you may take in terms of making a move or doing certain things and whatnot. But there were uneven political development in BLA, you understand? But we were always conscious of this, and we were always, even in the situations that we found ourselves in at that time, we studied underground. We didn't just, it wasn't just about guns and bombs and that sort of thing. I mean, we had to study. From the day of the Black Panther Party to the last BLA person went to prison, I mean, we studied. You know, it wasn't just about all armed struggle and no study. You know, there was medical cadre and personnel, and there were doctors, there were nurses, there were people who could, you know, deal with trauma, injuries that could deriving out of that, you know. Yeah, I mean, it was developed. It wasn't developed to our fullest extent what we would like to have had it been, but we were able to save some comrades' lives that way, and brothers was able to keep on fighting. You know, I mean, everybody, a lot of people, there are those who didn't die because they received medical help, and if they died later on, the powers that be was surprised that there were other marks that would have taken them out maybe 2 years ago. So yeah, it worked very well, you know. But that's in any underground, any armed movement. You got to have your medical thing intact, you know, or you should have. No, it wasn't just about individuals dealing with arms. People in the Black Liberation Army worked on many levels. You know, there were people who worked on medical levels. There were people who worked on transportation. There were people who worked on housing. The overall Black Liberation Movement. Now, we came out of the Black Liberation Movement, and that movement supported us. We were as strong as our movement was. If the movement became weak through oppression from the powers that be, that means that BLA is going to be weak. You know, we were only as strong as the movement, and our victories was the movement's victories. Those individuals who would house us and whatnot, they were movement people. Those people had 9-to-5 jobs. They was doctors, nurses, and lawyers, or whoever they may have been. John Q, sister, my aunt, your grandmother. These was the people that was housing us and whatnot and making us safe, and they looked out for us. And these was people from our community. After all, we didn't, you know, come from some other place. We came from the black community, you know, like And a lot of times when people ask us questions about blah or the Black Panther Party, or a lot of times they ask questions, a lot of us came into the movement with the same hang-ups that somebody have on the avenue. The sister on the avenue or the brother in the bar and whatnot, we came into the Black Panther Party with all those warts. The only thing that made us different was that we was willing to change. But when we became politicized, then people started looking at us as if we came from somewhere else. The powers that be, they would try to drive a wedge between us and the black community, but we were the black community. You know, that they would say, they would write things like we were outlaws and the black community disowned us, which is bullshit. How you gonna disown us? We were the black community, you know? And like our support, because we didn't have the newspapers, we didn't control that. But we could go in any bar, any barbershop, or hair salon, and after an accident happened the night before, and people would be ranting and raving about what those ladies and men did the night before, you know. So I mean, you know, we were well accepted in the black community. If we were not, we would not have been able to exist. We would have been turned in. Very few people in the Black Liberation Army, very few who were turned in by informants. We usually got captured in military action, not that someone snitched on us over there. We were protected well, and this was the wishes of the black community. We had working relationship with many organizations, RNA, close relationships with prison movement, other revolutionary nationalist formations that was out there and whatnot. You know, I mean, like I say, we was from the black community, and any progressive people that we could work with, we worked with them, and we was about coalition building and solidarity with a lot of people, man. The Native American movement, the Chicano movement, you understand, the Young Lords, all people of color and people, or progressive people, period. We work with them, you know, and where we could do actions together, we did that. And some dealt with different levels of actions and some didn't. So, you know, I mean, but like, oh yes, no question. We believed on the united front. Expropriations were for the movement. It was not for individual gains and whatnot. We made withdrawals from the capitalist banks to further the revolution. We had to run underground. It takes a great deal of money. I mean, you gotta have cars, you gotta have apartments, you gotta have housing. You're moving around. You spend a great deal of money and whatnot. So it takes money to run a revolution. And so, like those expropriations were not done for selfish gains. We weren't trying to buy a house or to make coat of a Cadillac. We had practically taken a vow of poverty, because most of us had nothing but what was on our backs and whatnot. And we wasn't trying to get rich doing that. A lot of money went for legal fees, bailing people out, making sure people's commissary was stacked. You know, brothers didn't have to suffer or want for much if they were captured. A lot of our time was spent in terms of trying to liberate brothers who were captured. So, you know, it takes money to run any kind of struggle. I think that we should keep in mind that BLA, being a military wing of the liberation movement, and the political apparatus that was above ground and supporting BLA, it was their place to deal with those types of answers. But the Black Panther Party dealt with that early on. If you remember, Bobby Nose went to Sacramento with guns. And that was because the law of California at that time allowed you to have guns. And you could have them openly. And you could have them in a car as long as a round wasn't in the chamber. In New York at the same time, New York's laws was different. It had a Sullivan law. meaning you could get up to 5 years, I think, at that time, for having a concealed weapon. California, you could have your weapon out in the open and whatnot. And so the party, in its early days, coming out of California, you understand, they were able to deal with that from a legal point of view in terms of carrying arms. When the legislature, Ronald Reagan, being the governor at the time, wanted to take away with that law, that's when they marched on Sacramento. And that's when the party got its major national, international notoriety from that episode, that them trying not to prevent them from passing that law that would take their arms away from them, because at that time they needed them in California. We know that a lot of times when we're captured in prison, that we have to deal with the bourgeois legal system, but it's our job to expose that system for its shortcomings and its inaccuracies and its injustices toward the people that they've captured and whatnot. In exposing the system in this country, any aspect of the system that's not doing what it's supposed to do for its people or what it claims to do, that's educating the masses of people. Once the people become educated that the system is not working, this is a contradiction. And once they see the contradiction, they see a need to do some other things. So that's why these trials, that's why when you go to these courtrooms, that's why those brothers and sisters are on trial. They're educating the masses about the contradiction within the judicial system and about why they're receiving so much time as opposed to somebody else doing a more heinous crime and not receiving that kind of time. It's the same. See, we take the fight is not just on the battlefield in the streets. The fight is also in the judicial system. The fight is against all aspects of this government's its laws and how oppressive they are and how unfair they are. So when we go off in the courtroom and don't allow the trial to proceed and we disrupt the trial and we're not having it or we're not coming out and whatnot, the masses see that. And the first the masses may say, there's some crazy motherfuckers there. But then on the other hand, they could see the contradictions. That's what we're talking about and whatnot. The same thing with Sunday Arcola's trial, the 21 and whatnot. The 21, you had individuals in the 21 trial who defended themselves. Afeni Shakur, she was one of her. She defended herself, and she did it eloquently. And she pointed out all the contradictions in that 157 count indictments they brought against them. You understand? And a 2-year trial, the most costly trial in New York State's history up until that time. And after 2 years of being incarcerated, most of them in Sunday Ellis, they locked up the whole time. He wasn't one of the ones that came out on bail. They acquitted them in 45 minutes. 2 years. I mean, something's fundamentally wrong with that thing, Now, some people would say, well, the acquittal of Sunday out and the 21, that proves that the system works. That's bullshit. It don't prove that the system works. First of all, who's gonna give him his 2 years back? Loss of employment, names smeared through the mud. They was accused of gonna blow up Mason's department store, Botanical Gardens, the subway system in New York City. Alienate them from the masses. They was ranting and raving. Yeah, you see, they was talking about they for the people. They was gonna blow the people up on Easter Sunday. So these are the contradictions, man. That they were able to expose and whatnot at that time. And same thing with the BLA trials. All those trials were disruptive trials because we wasn't gonna go to the penitentiary willingly. Well, we knew that a lot of times there were incidents there where they threw down on us first in terms of these armed confrontations and whatnot. And we just wasn't having it. We were not gonna have that, like I said, if there had to be funerals, there'd be funerals on both sides. Some of the differences with the deacons for defense, you see, my understanding of history around the Deacons for Defense, here's some brothers and sisters came out of Bogalusa, Louisiana, because it was a very oppressive place. And it was also a place where the civil rights movement had failed to go into, certain parts of Louisiana. You see history of them marching in Mississippi and Alabama. Louisiana, man, especially Bogalusa, was off the charts. So those brothers and sisters down there had to take up arms to defend themselves. They were killing and lynching people, and it all didn't make the news. And then on the other hand, the Deacons for Defense was the ones who strung that perimeter around the civil rights marches. When we see these marches marching through Mississippi and Alabama, long lines of people, ask yourself, why did the Klan just run out of the woods and start shooting and killing up a bunch of people? Because them brothers was back in them woods and whatnot. They put that defense around the civil rights movement. And I think it's very, very unfair to them to not have been recognized as such, because the civil rights movement want to take the position that it's about nonviolence. They didn't want to talk about the people with the guns and whatnot and people who stood up like that. And that does a disservice to our overall movement. It does a disservice to black people. It does a disservice in terms of our history and whatnot. When we don't talk about that aspect of our history and whatnot, when we try to criminalize that aspect of our history and say they're just a bunch of thugs and whatnot, and then they're off the street and whatnot. Everybody wasn't being beaten and water hosed down and turning the other cheek. You know, we know that from Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman. And if you do a little study, a little further study in your history and whatnot, we know that with John Brown and Harper's Ferry and the raid and whatnot. And if you go a little further in that history there, then you have to ask yourself, why didn't Frederick Douglass, why wasn't he on that raid? Harriet Tubman and the rest of them. Now, Harriet Tubman, that's my hero in that. I mean, I love this woman, man. But I mean, so don't take the position that that those brothers and sisters out there who died out there like that and who put their lives on the line, that it didn't matter, that it was just a futile attempt, exercising futility. That's nonsense, you know. I mean, like, a lot of those brothers in the Deacons for Defense, they left Louisiana. A lot of them came into the North and Chicago and became taxi drivers and melted off into history and whatnot. But it's unfair to the generation that come along now that don't know anything about that history and whatnot. And to think that we was just always subservient and passive and just dying peacefully, you know, that's ridiculous, man. You know, if we're gonna tell the history of black people in this country, we need to tell all aspects of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We need to talk about all of that there. And then let the chips fall where they may. You know, I mean, no other people that I know of, that I've read about, have ever suppressed that aspect of their history when it existed. You know, we're so fond to talk about how brave we fought in World War II and World War III, and like, but when it comes for black people, we ain't got no blood. We bleed all over the world, but we ain't, like Malcolm said, we ain't got no blood when it comes to us, you know. That's legitimate. We bled in Germany, Korea, Vietnam, you know, but like here, and we went to war in those places for much less than would have happened to us here. You know, I mean, for much, much less, you know. It happens all the time, I suppose, huh? Freedom to be safe, freedom to not be messed with, freedom to, you know, pursue your life and your livelihood and without restraints. We're not talking about integration here, we're talking about just pure, simple freedom. You know, I mean, to be left alone, to be safe in your home and whatnot, to be, you have some intellectual prizes to pursue all that you can be. You know, that's freedom. You know, I mean, like, and why should we have to point to black children who become exceptional scholars or go into space? Why, I mean, with with the restraints that they've had against them, they were able to make those achievements. But why should we have to have those kind of restraints? What about the rest of our population that wasn't able to reach those heights because they were suppressed, exploited, not given the chance, you know? That's freedom to me. When a question like that, it is what the Black Liberation Movement did and what Blah was able to the extent it was able to protect that movement to allow it to do those things, because you're talking about mass front work, working with the masses of people and setting programs in place and whatnot. Blah was not in a position to do that. Blah was in a position to protect its movement. That was his goal, to protect its people. So the movement was able to develop and go on, you know, and the movement, and you know, the Black Liberation Movement, the jury's not in on that yet. You know, now is the jury in on Blah. You know, I mean, so like, cause there's still a manifestation of all that still taking place today and whatnot. That's why we have the San Francisco 8 trial going on. These people in their late 50s and in the early 70s. And they're being taken, so the ramifications of that period of time is still with us today and whatnot. And it also is manifesting, that period of time and that history is manifesting itself in the hip hop world today. You know, that's why you have a lot of people in the hip hop movement becoming consciousness, you know, as opposed to say 5 or 6 years ago. There seemed to have been a transformative development within the hip hop consciousness. You know, I mean, they're saying things now that they weren't saying 10 years ago. Hell, Alicia Keys recently made a comment about it, they needed another Black Panther Party. These things were not taking place in the last 10, 15 years. They are doing research on that period and that history and whatnot. Unlike our times from the 60s, struggle was all about culture, all aspects of our culture. You had James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. You had the Temptations. You had people doing anti-drug songs during that period of time. You had Last Poet talking about revolution and whatnot. Nikki Giovanni and her poetry. Little known sister Valerie Johnson. These people were making poetry during that period of time, you know, addressing the conditions within the Black community, you know, and so it was easy to organize then because oppression was so blatant and so in your face, and while it is still blatant in some quarters in our community, they have camouflaged it. So people have a tendency to think that it's not happening to them. It's like Malcolm did the analogy about you go to the dentist and he give you some Novocaine and you sitting there bleeding with blood running down your jaw and don't even know you're in pain. So a lot of us, you know, we say some people take the position that was the civil rights, but we not with that. That ain't happening to us now. Until he walk out in the street and have his face get blown off by the police department. He get beat into the cement out there. He find himself railroaded to one of the state penitentiaries with a life sentence for a crime he didn't commit. He go before a jury, and it's an all-white jury, and they looking at him like he's crazy. And if he didn't commit the crime, he just ought to have committed. You know, so I mean, you know, like. I think oppression, and sometimes oppression breeds a lot of resistance. You know, people become oppressed. You know, people take it so long, and that's all people. That's just humankind, I think. The myth is that we were outlaws, that we were divorced from the black community, that no one knew us in the black community, that we had no support in the black community. That was a myth. We would not have been able to exist without the black community. We sought refuge in the black community. The black community housed us, made us safe, nursed us back to health, and kept us moving. And when we ran out of arms and couldn't get our own arms, they supplied us with arms. That was the black community. The Black Liberation Army comes from the black community. Make no mistake about that. That 13-year-old you just passed on the street, that little girl skipping rope or doing double dutch down the block, tomorrow morning she may be a soldier in the Black Liberation Army, or the next 4 or 5 years. Depends on how her life goes and how this government treats her, you know? So those are some of the myths and whatnot, you know. The Black Liberation Army have did wonders in helping black youth, black people with their own self-esteem. Because like I say, you know, like when you see that you're being beaten into the cement, a lot of funerals of your people and nobody else is paying for this shit, that's like a hopeless situation. That's demoralizing. I mean, like no one should have to live like that. And you shouldn't want to bring your children up in a society like that. Imagine what that's doing to a 6 or 7-year-old, seeing someone drugged down the stair, 4 or 5 flights of stairs and whatnot, beaten to death, and then there's no justice, there's nothing happens behind that. That person is being scarred. That is psychological violence against the youth, you know. So, you know, yeah, we think that even in our loss and those who died and whatnot, we think that it was the right thing to do at that period in time. Given the information that we had at that period in time, if we had no other information out there, then we would do it all over again tomorrow in a heartbeat, the same way. Because we only can make decisions on what we have and what we know. Fear makes people act strangely. And we have to understand fear. We can't hold that against the people. It was fear. It was fear from the counterintelligence program. It was fear how they was moving on us and how they came down on the black community, certain elements in the black. People had their doors kicked in, was not even affiliated with the Black Liberation Army. In this search for us, it was fear. And so we understand what fear can do. If the movement, if the liberation movement, the Black Liberation movement as a whole had been stronger, we would have been able to weather that storm there. But I mean, the people, man, you know, like, we didn't just deal with the local police department, the counterintelligence programs, we was dealing with the Central Intelligence Agency, Army Security, Naval Security. All of these people spied on the Black Liberation Movement in this country and the BLA. We got tons and tons and tons of files that the counterintelligence program kept on individuals and whatnot. Now, mind you, all this paperwork that they kept on, and a lot of us, man, like I say, we weren't even 25 years old at that time. And so that kind of repression coming down on the black community made people fearful, you know? But again, I say, if the Black Liberation Movement was stronger, we would be only as strong as our movement. If the Civil Rights Movement, if other elements in the black community had supported us, it wouldn't have been that way. It would not have turned out that way. We, from the people, we can only do what the people do. We don't have the power to just liberate our people, because if we could, we would have, and we would have did it much before all those deaths took place. I suppose that an apology would be in order for the young people, because we didn't accomplish our goal, because like our intentions were to make it a much better place for those that was going to come after us, and we would have hoped that somebody like you wouldn't have to be here on a Friday night sitting up in Columbia University making a recording. You could be out with your booth somewhere, chilling out or dancing on the floor, instead of trying to have to deal with struggle. But we didn't win. We didn't you know, but the jury's still out. The struggle still continues. Our elected officials, the black officials, and the black so-called leaders, they don't have enough backbone to speak out on those people and whatnot. Obama, they talking about president. I can't see voting for anybody if he ain't talking about freeing some political prisoners. Why shouldn't that, I mean, why aren't people confronting people about that? Hillary Clinton for that matter. Bill Clinton cut loose a few people when he left office and whatnot. Some people but he didn't cut loose any black political prisoners. And he didn't free Lily Peltier. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that those people that he did give pardons to didn't deserve it, because they most certainly did. But it's an uneven development, you know. And I think that if the elected officials don't start speaking about political prisoners in the black community, they put pressure on them to speak about these people and whatnot. You talk about Nelson Mandela. We got a Nelson Mandela. We got Sundar Coley. We got Herman Bell. We got Jalil Montgomery. We got Bashir Hamid. We got all these political prisoners across the country, man. We got Yogi Pannell, who's sitting up in Florence. You got Dr. Tupac Shakur. Those are our Nelson Mandelas and whatnot. But it's safe to worship people from afar because it don't have the same ramifications and whatnot. When Nelson Mandela came to New York, we had to fight to even get to tell him about our political prisoners in this country. Nobody addresses that. Nobody talks about the American political prisoners and whatnot. And if they do, it's not publicized. And they're not saying it on a public forum where it can be heard. You understand? In the meantime, we got people that have been locked up 35 and 40 years. And you're talking about political prisoners. When you talk about political prisoners, you must always talk about our political exile, because we want them home too, without charges. There's no reason why Assata Shakur should need to be in Cuba and couldn't come to her mother's funeral, or her daughter's graduation, or the birth of her grandchildren. There's no need. We need to be crying out for those. All of our political prisoners need to be returned to the United States if they so desire. Sutter Whale, he been out of the country almost 40 years. He's been in exile longer than a lot of us have been alive. That's a long time, man. You know, that's outrageous. Pete O'Neill, of course, Pete said he don't have a desire to come back no more, him and Shaw. And not just them, you got DC languishing down in the south of France. And the other brothers who are in France and in Egypt and elsewhere in North Africa is in exile. We need, every time political prisoners is mentioned, our political exiles must be mentioned. There needs to be a campaign for those people to return to this country and whatnot, because a lot of them left here on trumped up charges, man, and that was fabricated by the government. And as a result of our movement benefiting from it, our people. Taking that brunt force off of John Q. Citizen on the street in Bed-Stuy, Harlem, and saying that we'll deal with this ourselves. That took some of the pressure at the time off the black community. And that's what we wanted to do, you know. And then we found out that when we stepped out there and whatnot, they weren't all that bad and whatnot. It's a question of who lays down the most firepower. That's who wins the day. They ain't all that invincible. You understand? They're cowards, really. Because anytime that you get up in the morning, man, and kiss your missus goodbye and strap on that gun and come into the black community and brutalize our people and whatnot, you're a coward. You're a coward. This community, our community, is the most defenseless community on the face of the earth, with the exception of the prison population. We got nothing to defend ourselves, you know. So they murder, kill, rape, jail us, and do what they want to do with impunity. So there was a period in time we can always go back to and say that wasn't happening like that. And that day will come again if the conditions don't change, because conditions breeds resistance. Always have and always will. a good job. I just think that, in closing, I would just say free all our political prisoners and bring our exiles home.